about the nutritional value of plants in Hell's Canyon, and we heard about the educational value and different perspectives on Nez Perce stories, and we heard about an experiment in transcendentalism in Hell's Canyon. So this time we have another great variety of presentations from our students, and you'll see more interdisciplinarity and just what students have been doing all semester and since their time in the canyon last week, finalizing these projects. So without further ado, we'll get started, and we're beginning this session with Sarah Griffin and Cole Rorick. And they're presenting Nez Perce origin stories and gathering methods of plants.
Just 1 second while we get it set up.
Absolutely.
Can you see that all right? Okay, perfect.
Okay. Hello, so my name is Cole, and this is Sarah. Our project title is Nez Perce Plants and Their Uses. Our mentors, our peer mentor was Mari Carrillo, and our faculty mentor was Harold Crook. So our research question we were trying to answer was, what local plants did the Nez Perce tribe use in their foods and medicines?
And so we wanted to create a booklet, which we have here, and we entitled it The Plants Used by the Nez Perce Tribe. In our book, we discussed edible plants, and we sorted them out into categories of plants that would be dug, picked, and related to trees. And then the next category, medicinal plants. And under each of those, we wanted to include the Nez Perce name for them, the Latin name, and the common name, so that if anyone wants to do further research on the plants in our book, it's a little bit easier to find all of the information for that. And now to focus a little bit on the who, what, when, where, and why. So our book focuses on the Nez Perce tribe, but it does include some information from some other tribes in Idaho and in the surrounding areas. And for the what, it's focused on edible and medicinal uses of plants. When, although most of our information is from long ago uses, lots of the uses are still common today, and you can still find all of these plants. And that leads to the where. They're all found in the LC Valley and surrounding areas. And then moving on to the why of our project.
So the reason why we chose the topic that we did is, for me, I had a strong passion with the Nez Perce stories and the kind of cultural background with it. I took a class last semester of Nez Perce language with Harold Crook, and he helped to spark my interest in the different stories because he would tell them and I'd be very interested in them. And then for Sarah, she was into looking at the plants of the LC Valley and seeing their uses and different things that, that you can maybe do with them. So we decided to combine them into like plants used by the Nez Perce tribe, and with the uses, the medicals, and just to see what we could find. So for our methods of research, we used a lot of the library books along with Google searches and online sites for when we couldn't find the information necessarily in the book. And the pictures that we had in our book and on our slides, they are hand-drawn from Sarah. They are taken from different pictures that we saw in the book or online, but we wanted to put our own little twist on it by drawing our own pictures.
So now we'll move on a little bit to some of our findings. As I mentioned before, we split our book up into the first section being edible plants, and then split that further into plants that were dug, picked, and tree related. For each plant, we talk about its physical description, the habitat you would find it growing in, season of harvest, and important notes if there are any, and then the preparation and use of the plant. So we're going to share a little bit about a few plants. We'll just do one out of each section for the sake of time. Starting off with camas, because it is one of the most culturally significant plants of the Nez Perce tribe. So a description that we have in our book is the bulb of this root grows to be 10 to 30 millimeters wide with a blackish color outside and a white color inside. A characteristic trait is a cluster of bright blue flowers, and the leaves are grass-like and grow as tall as the stem. So that's kind of Most of our plants have sort of a description in that same sort of formatting. And then for habitat, it grows in meadows with lots of moisture that become dry in the springtime. Season of harvest would be springtime, but it is edible all seasons of the year. And then for important notes, there is a variety of camas called death camas, which has a similar appearance and habitat, but the color of the flowers is white or yellow to a cream color. And this plant is highly toxic, so it's really important to be able to distinguish between the two. And then preparation and use. Camas is prepared in a variety of ways. Sometimes it was boiled into a syrup that would be added to other dishes. Typically, it was baked in pits with hot rocks, and it would either be eaten immediately after or it would be dried out for storage. It does not need to be cooked. It is edible raw, and it has a sweet taste with a high sugar content but a low starch content. And sometimes the bulbs were pounded into cakes, which were sun-dried. And then a few other ways it was prepared would be boiled, which created a gummy, sticky sort of texture, and so would roasting or steaming it. They'd have a sort of similar outcome for that. And then with the camas, we made sure to include a story with that. So Cole is just going to share that story with you now.
Okay, so the story that we found is the characters are coyote and elk, and this I was reading, and there is versions of it that don't have elk, that it's actually moose instead. So the story goes, Coyote and his 5 sons went traveling one day to visit Elk, who also had 5 sons. When they arrived at Elk's lodge, they found no one home and nothing to eat. They were quite angry and put out because they were hungry. Shortly, Elk arrived, and after greeting his guests, leaned over and picked up a stick and started digging at his backside with it. Out came camas roots. Coyote was very disturbed. He felt it was impolite to serve one's guests dung, and so he loudly complained. Elk said, "That is not dung, but delicious camas root. I often carry them that way when I travel." Coyote tried them and found them quite tasty. He and his sons ate their fill. When Coyote departed, he asked Elk to visit him some day, and the next day Elk showed up. Coyote went over and picked up a stick to dig at his own backside, only to cause a wound. Elk said that only he could do it, so he took the stick and produced another feast of camas from his backside. As a form of friendship, Elk spread materials from his backside all around the area to form camas roots. To this day, camas roots appear a little bit like elk or moose dung when they are first dug up and after they are roasted. And so now to move on to one of the picked plants, we chose Black Mountain Huckleberry to talk for this one. And the description of it is the bushy part of the plant grows to be 10 to 40 centimeters tall and is a deciduous plant. It is solitary, cup-shaped flowers and many seeds. The habitat is commonly found on foothills and high mountains, but grows in many diverse habitats. The harvesting is at the end of June. Some important information is this is considered the most important berry of the Nez Perce tribe, as some research said, and as Thanksgiving celebration, they would present the most important foods near the beginning of the feast. Huckleberries presented 6 during Thanksgiving in mid-August. There's a celebration called the Huckleberry Feast. The preparation is, they have a very sweet flavor and often eaten raw, or they can be eaten with honey and cream as well, but they can also be cooked into sauces for a dessert.
And then moving on to our tree-related edible plant, which is black tree lichen. It is a dark brown color with a hair-like texture, grown all over landscapes in North America, Northern Europe, and Asia, and it grows on deciduous trees, so it can be harvested any time of the year. It is a traditional delicacy of Native Americans, and it's a dish that's still a common delicacy today. It used to be believed that lichen was only eaten during times of famine and in extreme hunger, but that's actually incorrect. It is difficult and time-consuming to prepare, so the main dish it's used in is, on rare occasions, in Indian pudding, which, and to prepare it for that is baked underground in a similar manner to camas. And now moving on to some of our medicinal plants.
So the medicinal plants that I'll be talking about is the fern-leaved lomadium. The description is the bush stands to be about 2 feet to 3 feet tall. and the leaves are triangular shaped with a pinnate or feather-like. The plant has yellow to purple flowers in umbels or clusters, and the fruit grows to be 1/2 inch big and has a very aromatic scent when crushed. The habitat is in arid or semi-arid foothills, shrublands, and openings, and the season of harvest that is best is late spring to early summer. Uh, and some important information, some tribes such as the Washi, I might be saying that wrong and I apologize if I am, used this plant during the Spanish flu, and later it was discovered that uh, the tribe that used it had less of a mortality rate than the surrounding areas that did not use it. And the use of it is it can be used in aromatherapy to treat bronchitis and many other wintertime lung diseases. It is a bronchial stimulant and has antiviral properties. It can help treat swollen lymph nodes, relieves flu symptoms, and may be taken with an onset of cold and flu symptoms to stop them in their tracks. And then for our week in Hell's Canyon, what I was able to learn from it is I was able to get like a deeper look into nature and like realize how many uses some plants had, along with looking at what we now consider as bad plants or like weeds. But for most of them, the Nez Perce did have a use for them, and they had some good uses out of them. And then it was interesting that almost all plants were used and had a use for them. There's, some that were poisonous, so they wouldn't be used. But I found it very intriguing.
And for me, the week during Hell's Canyon, it was interesting to be able to actually physically see some of the plants that we've been researching rather than just seeing pictures in books or reading a description from a page, but to actually go out and walk around and recognize that the plants that we're walking past are some of them that were used by the tribe traditionally. And then another benefit that I got from our trip was feeling a little more connected to nature rather than just looking in from the outside, and being able to feel like I'm actually part of nature, not just an observer. And in conclusion, we would like to thank our professors of Hell's Canyon Institute for making this semester a reality. We'd like to thank our mentors for guiding us along the way, and all of our amazing classmates for making our week in Hell's Canyon one of the best weeks of our lives. We also would like to leave our booklet that we've made with the class so that it can be added to the library, and that other students in the future, if they're interested, would be able to add to it. And yeah.
So these are the references that we use, books and online sites all together.
And all of these are listed in the back of our booklet as well. And that's all we've got. So thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. So next up, we have Rachel Hull, Archaeology and Hell's Canyon.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So hi, my name is Rachel. I'll be talking about archaeology. And so in a quick introduction to myself, I'm a biology major and an anthropology major. And so one of the values and things that we learn about in anthropology is how we can study humans in the past using whatever they left behind, including artifacts, remains, and even their garbage. And so what I was interested in is how archaeology has been conducted in the canyon and what we can learn from the different values and stakeholders who have a say in archaeology. And so for the goals for this project include providing an overview of the occupants and artifacts found in Hell's Canyon, to describe the policies and legislation that influence and dictate archaeology, and identify stakeholders and key perspectives regarding archaeology. And so to do this, I really focus on the Hell's Canyon recreational area because that's the place that we would be most in. This involved a literature review, looking at journal articles and legal documents. I also conducted interviews with Jason Lyon and Valerie Earl, who I will talk about later in the presentation. And this formed the basis of a case study. We looked at a similar case study about Hell's Canyon Recreation Area as a whole in, within the class, and I was really inspired and used that as an example to build this research project. And so to provide a little bit of a historical context, some of the early occupants of this area included the indigenous groups, including the Shoshone and Nez Perce tribe. There were also fur trappers and traders from the 1800s to the 1830s, explorers, missionaries, and Oregon Trail immigrants from the 1830s to 1860s, and the military groups, miners, and Bureau of Affairs from the 1850s and 1810s. Later, Hell's Canyon was recognized and it was registered as an archaeological district in 1984. This picture right here shows one of the first page of that form, and it lists 152 historic sites and 384 prehistoric sites. And so some of the policies that guided the creation of archaeology and the formation of the recreation area included the National Historic Preservation Act in 1965. This allowed for historical structures to be protected by federal government. And similarly, the Archaeological Resources Protection Act that would come in 1979 was specifically to secure, for the present and future benefit of the American people, the protection of archaeological resources and sites which are on public and lands and Indian lands. And so that became the foundation of protecting and learning from these historic and prehistoric sites. In addition, we have the Hell's Canyon National Recreation Act of 1975. And within this act, it established that 7 objectives, in which one of them was protection of archaeological and paleontological resources, and again, solidify the preservation and restoration of these historic sites. Furthermore, we see the development of Native American tribes being more involved with archaeology with the Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975, which allowed for Indian tribes to have greater autonomy and have the opportunity to assume the responsibility for the programs and services administered to them on the behalf of the Secretary of the Interior. In addition, there is the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. This allows and protects the rights of the Native Americans to exercise their traditional religions by ensuring access to these sites, use and possession of sacred objects, and the freedom to worship through ceremonies and traditional rites. In addition, there's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. This really paved the way for human remains of any ancestry must at all times be treated with dignity and respect, and to be returned and to the lineal descents of the Indian tribes and the Native Hawaiian organizations. And so again, paving the way for Indigenous groups to really have agency in archaeology over their resources, lands, and artifacts that are connected to them. And so some of the stakeholders in archaeology include the Bureau of Land Management, in which they have authority for the management of public lands and as designated by the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. We also have the U.S. Forest Service, and the U.S. Forest Service is specific in that the recreation area is managed by them. And so any research that is to be conducted would have to be kind of approved and overseen by the U.S. Forest Service. In addition, there is a National Park Service, which is to promote and regulate the use of federal areas. Furthermore, there's the Bureau of Reclamation and the Fish and Wildlife Service. This is to ensure that no damage or damage to be kept to a minimum from any research that be done to the water resources, the fish and wildlife, and in the environment as a whole. In addition, there's also, of course, the indigenous groups that have ancestral ties to that land, and archaeologists, and in the institutions that are studying these sites. In this next half, I'll be talking about the different perspectives in more detail. And so one of the first interviews I conducted was with Jason Lyon, who is an archaeologist that worked with the Nez Perce Cultural Resource Program. He offered a lot of insight on how archaeological research is started within the canyon specifically, and that artifacts are considered government property, meaning that if any person was to enter into the area and take something, they could actually be charged with federal crime because it is considered government property. And so any research that is to be done, it has to be approved by the Bureau of Land Management. And however, if work was conducted within that agency, then they're not required to submit that permit. He offers his experience of working closely with the tribes and his work in salvage archaeology, in which any developments that would occur from companies or different entities, and they are concerned about the area and having any potential archaeological sites, that they would archaeologists would enter in and really study and gain as much knowledge that they can before development occurs. In addition, he also spoke about the Nimiipuu Tribe and some of their perspective. They assert that the resources, artifacts, and remains belong to their ancestors. And again, as the policies that I've discussed previously, that require entities to just consult with the tribes first, the main one being the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. He also talked about the shift from the Bureau of Indian Affairs handling all of any issues or proceedings being now shifted towards individual tribes. And so that was ensured by the Indian Self-Determination Act. It was also, archaeology was important as for land management. And so, for example, the Clearwater Casino that we know had archaeological remains and archaeological research conducted before the casino was built. And so part of again, the salvage archaeology, in which archaeologists will come in and study whatever they can before development. I also talked with Valerie Earl and her experience as a private owner. So she spoke about her historical connection to the land, and that the property that she owns has been passed down for 4 generations. She spoke about some of the damage that has occurred throughout time, including the breaking of the specific rocks that had these petroglyphs, the stealing, and even spray painting. So specifically, she mentioned an instance where individuals spray painted a cross on one of the petroglyphs as they believed that it was demonic in nature. And she specifically mentioned how her experience has shaped that archaeologists are thieves rather than scholars. So just continuously taking and taking, which is reflected in the history of archaeology within the US in general. Her ultimate goals was preservation and education, and already she has established the next caretakers that would look after and vowed to protect this site at Buffalo Eddy. And lastly, I want to talk about my own experience within Hell's Canyon and the value that is provided to this project. It was really important to see some of these archaeologically significant sites and to make that connection with the land and the space. Also talking with Valerie Earl and Steve Evans about their experiences, specifically the challenges and barriers that occur to protect these sites. For example, Steve Evans recounted an experience in which he was doing research with Alan Pinkham on pit houses at Cougar Bar, and so they one day saw a for sale sign, and so he immediately contacted the U.S. Forest Service and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, this is historically an important site, it should be protected. And U.S. Forest Service was very understanding and vowed to help protect that site and recognize its historical importance. And so with this in mind, when we look at what's next for archaeology, is to continue to acknowledge the history of archaeology in the U.S. and the some of the tragic instances in which Indigenous groups were not involved and did not have a say in what was taken and what was showcased on in museums. And so acknowledging that history, and Jason Lyon specifically noted that there's been a shift from collection. So again, that previous history of just taking things to preservation and making sure that it will be there for years and years to come for future studies. Lastly, another key takeaway is Indigenous groups having more agency and involvement in the archaeological world. And so new archaeologists that are being hired are working very closely with the tribes. And so Jason Lyon also spoke that tribes are similar to the Nimiipuu Tribe, have developed their own cultural resource programs that have hired on archaeologists not only outside of their culture but within their own communities to conduct these research. And those are my references, and I'll leave questions at the end. Thank you.
Really great job. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, next up we have Abby Van Horn and Caden Massey presenting on their Hell's Canyon Animal Field Guide.
Hi.
Hi.
Give us a second, please.
Share screen.
Oh no.
Click on it.
But it's not there yet. We're trying to open it right now.
Now you gotta,
Can you guys see that? No, maybe.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, good. Well, we just don't have the cameras on, so we couldn't see if you guys were like nodding or not. Okay. This is our presentation. Take it away, Abby.
You're reading the first part.
Oh yeah. So here's our mission statement. Our mission is to create a field guide of the wildlife to expect while traveling up Hell's Canyon. Through our trip, we collected pictures and data to create this project. The project will feature animals we saw and got pictures of, their scientific name, their Nez Perce name, their habitat, how dangerous they are, and their rarity. We believe by having this information handy and readily available to future generations of Hell's Canyon Institute, we can cultivate an environment of learning and cultural exposure. In addition to our animals, we have the Nez Perce creation story included to better help students understand the cultural significance these creatures hold to the indigenous people. Our project is also meant to be expanded on. We encourage any student, staff, faculty, or community members to add on to our project by attaching more animals or better photos. There are hundreds of species that live in Hell's Canyon, and such a task would be astronomical for 2 people over a few months. We would like people to help us help others by expanding our work, adding new information, and bringing in unique perspectives. We give permission for anyone to take this piece and use it for research purposes or use it as a template for future projects. So this is a creation story that I am about to read. I'm not going to read the Nimiipuu Tim because I don't want to mess it up and be disrespectful, but it's the stuff with the hyphens and stuff. The great spirit chief called the animal people together. They came from all parts of the world. Then the spirit chief told them there was to be a change, that a new kind of people was coming to live on earth. All of you animal people must have names, the chief spirit said. Some of you have names now, some of you haven't, but tomorrow all will have names that shall be kept by you and your descendants forever. In the morning, as the first light of day shows into the sky, come to my lodge and choose your names. The first to come may choose any name that he or she wants. The person may take any other name. That is the way it will go until all the names are taken, and to each person I will give work to do. That talk made the animal people very excited. Each wanted a proud name and the power to rule some tribe or some part of the world, and everyone was determined to get up early and hurry to the spirit chief's lodge. This is a very long story, so we just included this beginning part.
And we also got the story from Professor Harold Crook. I'm waiting for him to email me back about citing it, but I'm going to cite that after he emails me. Okay, so the first animal or creature that we found was the Selway forest snail. This is their scientific name and their Nez Perce name. Historically, populations occurred in the Selway, Lochsaw, Lower Salmon, and Upper Clearwater drainages. Isolated colonies currently exist along the Lower Lochsaw River, the Salmon River, the Selway River, and one Selway tributary.
I gave it a danger rating of 0.5. I think it would be very difficult to have this snail hurt you. So it's of no danger. And it's somewhat rare compared to the other snails in the area.
The next animal that we found in the Hell's Canyon was the western toad, and that's their scientific name with their Nez Perce name as well. The species is commonly found in different places depending on the season. In wet weather condition, in spring and fall, the species is found on roads. During breeding time, they are most commonly found in waters or near waters. In any other season, they are found in meadows or forests. However, the western toad always prefers wet areas.
I gave it a danger rating of 2 because I think most of the time when you see one, it's not gonna be a problem. But if you pick it up out of a scummy pond, you might, get something from the scum. So they're a little dirty. So don't just pick it up and wash your hands after. It's generally not rare, but as with most toads and frogs, it's becoming endangered.
The next animal that we found is the white-tailed deer, and that's the scientific name and the Nez Perce name. The white-tailed deer live in wooded areas and can be found in most of the United States and southern Canada. The white-tailed deer's habitat can grow small due to human development and population growth of humans. White-tailed deer's lack of predators allows the deer to overpopulate.
I gave it a danger rating of 4. On occasion, people have been known to get attacked by deer, especially if they have fawns with them or if the deer has no other options. It's pretty rare, but it can still hurt you. And they're overpopulated, so they're incredibly common.
The next animal that we found was a smallmouth bass, and the scientific name is right below it along with the Nez Perce name. The smallmouth bass is native to North America. The smallmouth bass species like to live in clear and calm waters. They prefer rocky bottoms for good places to stay hidden and stay out of the sun. They can live in lakes, streams, rivers, or reservoirs.
I gave it a danger rating of 2 because people can get stabbed by their spines if they grab it the wrong way, but that's about it. And they're not rare at all. And a picture credit to Cole. This is Cole's elbow holding that fish. So thank you, Cole.
The next animal that we have is the wild turkey, with the scientific name below it, along with the Nez Perce name again. The wild turkey lives in hard wooded areas. They also live in areas with openings such as fields, orchards, and pastures.
I gave it a danger rating of 3 because generally they're going to run away from you. But if it's mating season and you're toe-to-toe with a tom turkey, it might start pecking at you or trying to intimidate you. The most important thing is to not let it scare you and don't let it let you back up, and it won't do anything. They're generally not rare at all. They're everywhere. And the turkey in that picture on the left is a half domesticated turkey named Claw.
The next animal that we went with was the bighorn sheep, with the scientific name below it, as well as the Nez Perce name. The bighorn sheep habitat is very versatile. They are found in southwestern United States, Nevada, Mexico, southwestern Canada, and throughout the Rocky Mountains. Due to their excellent climbing abilities, they are often found in steep canyons and on cliffs.
I gave it a danger rating of 5 because odds are if you see one, it's going to be on a cliff or a mountain. And if you're on a cliff or a mountain, you're already in danger. And on occasion, during mating season especially, the rams can get a little excited and they can ram you with their horns or they can kick you. and they're not really that rare.
And then we got this picture from Dawson Luther with Snake River Adventures. The next animal we will be talking about is the western rattlesnake with the scientific name below it, as well as the Nez Perce name. The western rattlesnake is most commonly found in drier regions. They prefer rocky areas or an area with rocky components.
I gave it a danger rating of 9, not a 10. They are pretty deadly. They're a venomous snake. Their venom can kill you from anywhere between 6 and 48 hours, and it'll start doing permanent damage after 2 hours of the venom. But it all really depends on how much venom they inject into you, which is completely up to the snake. Yeah, but they'll warn. I only gave it a 9 because they'll at least warn you when you're close most of the time with the rattle. But it's out of 10, so it's still pretty bad. They're not really that rare. They're overpopulated because not many things want to hunt a rattlesnake.
And then this picture we got from Jerry Ellison in this class. The next animal we're going to talk about is the white sturgeon with the scientific name below it and the Nez Perce name. The white sturgeon is the only of 8 species that lives in Idaho's waters. Due to dams, these fish usually spend their life in fresh water. The species now resides in the Snake River, the Salmon River, and the Kootenai River, all in Idaho.
I gave it a danger rating of 2, which surprises some people, but sturgeon don't have teeth, really. They're more gummy, like a trout. So if they bite you, at most, it's going to be like a little pinch because they're not trying to hurt you, and they probably can't. They're fairly large, though, so I think the scare factor is what does most of the danger. They're not really rare because they're a protected species, but if they weren't a protected species, they would probably be extinct within a couple of generations because they're so big and people like to fish for them.
And then we also got this picture from Dawson Luther with Snake River Adventures. The next animal we'll talk about is the mountain cottontail rabbit with the scientific name below it, as well as the Nez Perce name. The mountain cottontail rabbit prefers areas with lots of brush, rocks for coverage, and vegetation. The species also uses burrows all year for protection.
They have a danger rating of 2. Rabbits can bite a little bit and they can scratch a little bit, but odds are if you pick up a rabbit, it's probably just going to freeze in your hands and not do anything. They're generally not rare. And this picture we took outside one of the cabins we were staying at on the left.
Mm-hmm. So the next animal is the American black bear with the scientific name and the Nez Perce name below it. The American black bear is found in many places. The species chooses areas with big tree coverings, brush, and vegetation for protection and food. They like mountain areas, forests, and swamps.
I only gave the black bear a danger rating of 8, which seems to surprise some people, but I believe on an average year in America, only 1 person is killed by a black bear. Most of the bear deaths you hear about are from grizzly bears. But black bears aren't that big. They're pretty big, but they're not that big. And they really don't like to fight people. A bear probably won't even attack you if it's hungry. The only reason a bear will attack you is to defend its cub. So they're really not of much concern. They're generally not really rare either. They're all over the place.
So in conclusion, we'd like to give a big thank you to our course director, Dr. Marlowe, the course faculty, Dr. Kylie Britzman, Renee Harris, and Liz Martin. A thank you to the peer mentors of this course, Marian Delaney. Thank you to Dawson Luther for the white sturgeon picture, and to Gerald Ellison for the western rattlesnake picture. We would also like to thank the caretakers of Garden Creek, Pam and JD, and the Snake River Adventures boat crew that made our time in Hell's Canyon unforgettable. We'd also like to thank our faculty mentors that helped us through this project, Dr. Liz Martin again, and Dr. Harold Crook. Lastly, we would like to thank Lewis Clark State College and all the funders that make this course possible. And then our references.
And to reiterate, we would like if this project could be saved and used as a template for future classes here, because if enough people work on this over time, we should have a very comprehensive guide that people can look at when they go down the river, and it'll help people with their projects a lot. And it'll just be kind of a cool thing to have for this class as reading material. And that is our project.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It'd be interesting to see how future students rated the danger rating of these different animals and species. So, all right, fantastic. Okay, and yes, definitely we want all of these projects, all of these booklets, and we will be using them and putting them into the library. So, all right. Our final presenter is, I believe, that's it. Yep. Final presenter, Tiara Yunt. This is Hell's Canyon Through a Scientific and Spiritual Lens, a poetry collection.
Good morning. Good to see everyone again. This has been an awesome recap on everything. Let me just go ahead and get my screen share up. All right. Any verbal affirmation that you can see this?
Yeah, I can see it.
We can see.
Okay, great. Great. Let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Tiara, and I am very excited to share with you my final project of Hell's Canyon, Science in Spirit, a poetry collection project. And before we even get started, I would like to take note that I put a link in the chat, which is a direct connection to the booklet that I created. I did not have access to be able to print it yet into a hard copy, but that is something I plan to do, this collection of poems that I'll be talking about. But if you want to peek at it during the presentation, it's there for your reference now or afterwards. So in deciding what to do for my research goal, I wanted to do a couple things. One was to tap into my own strengths, which is as an English major and a foreign language minor. I wanted to create a collection of poems patterned somewhat after Michael Wasson and add it to the library that's of information available for the Hell's Canyon Institute. And additionally, I wanted to take an approach that mirrors the approach of the class itself, which is a multidisciplinary approach. Looking at Hell's Canyon through a narrow lens, I wanted to look at it through two seemingly opposing lenses and try to combine them together. The 5 elements that I wanted to focus on and create these poems about were the Snake River itself, bighorn sheep, blue bunchgrass sturgeon, and the basalt columns. And you'll see in that selection that I chose a plant, I chose a fish, I chose stone, and a body of water, as well as a mammal. So there's quite a variety there being represented. And in asking why would we do this? Why would you want to write more poetry about the canyon? I really started looking ahead at the potential influence that can be. For me personally, poetry is very inspiring, can do a lot for the ways people see the world. So my end goal in creating this booklet of poetry is to influence current and future students of the class or any readers in the community to develop more ethical beliefs and then behaviors towards the Hell's Canyon. Something I learned in this institute class was that you can't really influence behavior until you influence belief. And so I wanted to use this as a tool to help people understand different ways of looking at the canyon and wind up with a more holistic perspective by doing so. As you've already seen today, there are multiple strengths within the Institute itself. Each student has their own major, their own interests, as was represented by the presentations today, this morning. And one of the other goals I had was in bridging those schools of thought and causing a wholeness to occur by looking at the canyon through multiple lenses. I also had a personal why in this, in that I wanted to, while I was in the field experience, go in with the goal of connecting with what I was seeing and feeling on more than one level. In order to do this, I first needed to decide what science meant, what I meant by science. And with that, I hit the library books. I contacted Liz Martin, biology teacher at LCSC, and asked for as much information as I could get about each element, their biological, their botanical, or their ecological function. So I was really looking for vocabulary words, looking to bolster the way that you can identify or name something, including their binominal name, classification, and especially their relation to the canyon. Because I feel like when you're trying to connect things, you need to look at the relationships that something has to everything else surrounding it. A really key part of this science method was my actual field experience and in identifying those things for myself. The only thing that I was not able to see in person was the sturgeon. I had hoped to come across one, and there were some fishermen that went out and were very excited to try to round one up, and they were not able to. However, I was able to do a very thorough interview with two extremely experienced sturgeon fishermen, Nate Luther and Kyson, and I was able to get a really good feel for what it's like to be on the boat, to have the Lyon taught, the different baits that they use, what it's like to touch, smell, kiss the nose of a sturgeon, those kinds of things. I tried to go through their hands-on experience and create a poem based off of that. So that was the scientific aspect. As far as the spirit goes, that's a little more subjective. When I am referencing spirit, I'm really referencing that connection again to the human connection to nature and nature to the human. I wanted to acknowledge in my poems in some way that mystical life force that I believe is in all things. And a really important aspect of this as well is giving acknowledgement to the Nimiipuu ancestral lands and their indigenous and spiritual influences. So this field experience for me was where I had done all this reading and all this research and all this vocabulary collecting, but then I was able to feel and be present in the canyon itself and kind of have a culmination of these personal connections all coming together. So the field experience itself was completely important and relevant and needful for this project to move forward. As far as results go, I wanted to share two poems that I wrote to demonstrate and illustrate a little bit of what I talk about when I'm saying combining science and the spirit. So I will read this for you now. Festuca idahoensis, blue bunch grass, humble clump of palest green yellow. If I gathered your dense perennial hair, wrapped a ribbon round and pulled, would a screaming child emerge from your wild sprawling? No. Beneath your sun-thirsty blades works a wise mother, a grandmother, decades deep with reaching roots, where phosphorus and fungi, symbiotic mycorrhizae, feast at her fingertips. Together, their hands with ancient knowing hold up the hillside, knitting the canyon walls like a blanket. And I included this in results, not just because it is the result of my combining this information and my experience in the canyon, but I also learned a lot as I was going through this. For example, I had no idea that blue bunch grass, a standard clump that you would see all along the hillsides in the Hells Canyon region, was that old. I wouldn't imagine that it could be 60, 70, 80 years old, looking at something 12 to 18 inches high. I didn't realize the very intricate root systems and the way that fungus has a symbiotic relationship with the roots, creating phosphorus and creating a more healthy soil composition. It made a lot of sense to me as I was trying to put this together, how everything is interrelated, works together, and how science and spirit can combine. Another result from this particular poem was in listening to Stacia Morfin's explaining how even plants to the Nimiipuu were considered relatives. They were ancestors to the people, that they were a living thing and something of very much value and something that could instill wisdom. So this poem is an example of combining native wisdom and lore and storytelling and understanding with things that are happening on a scientific level. So hopefully you enjoyed that poem. The next one that I'd like to share with you is about the basalt. It's called Columbia Plateau Colonnades. Predating the petroglyphs and the pickaxes, glacial rivers knifed and gutted the entrails of Hell's Canyon hilltops, exposing the once raw earth blood magma, pulsing remnant from her fiery veins. Now dark, volcanic, fine-grained rock, basalt, bared in haphazard columnar display, vertical thrust, skyward lifting, organic, unpredictable, igneous jointing, mighty foundation of the primordial entablature, art exhibit in stone. And this for me was a very exciting and fun thing to explore. It was the most inanimate, probably the least spiritual of the topics that I had chosen, of the elements I had chosen. So it was going to present one of the biggest challenges. But I really enjoyed being not necessarily as much of the science brain, learning so much about how the earth crusts shift and being able to pick at Keegan Schmidt's brain a little bit and understanding how lava flows and the reactions when lava hits water and those types of things was really educational for me. So I feel like I learned a lot from this type of exploration. The last day, one of the last days in the canyon, we had a yoga and meditation day, and this was an exercise that I had written down. We're supposed to have a quiet moment after doing that and share what we felt. And this is what I came up with. Quietude in nature is a falsehood, for even when calmness pervades the mind and no utterances escape the lips, our ancestors whisper through the wild grasses, "You are home." And I really felt like when I was in the canyon, that even when I had quiet moments to think about my poetry and my project, to think about the science of what I was learning and the spirit of it, that it was never truly quiet, that there were whispering winds and wild grasses and plants and animals all around that were full of life and doing what they do. In conclusion, I have basically come to understand that there is no one correct way to see the canyon. There are many, many ways to approach it, and that probably the most dynamic and fulfilling way of doing that is to take a multi-dimensional and a multidisciplinary approach. Those connections with physical location, the ancestral histories, the native histories, the spirits and meanings of places, as well as their very strict classifications in a scientific way, are all important and all add to the beauty of the canyon. I do have a list of references, and I would be happy to take questions after this. Thank you so much.
All right, fantastic job, all of you. At this time, we can open it up for questions and get some more information from our presenters.
I have a question I have a few, but for Sarah and Cole, are there any current efforts to preserve and or revitalize the traditional food plants discussed in your presentations within Hell's Canyon?
We didn't have much of a chance to look into that, but from the library books that we got, lots of them were focused around tribal uses of some of the plants. And from what we were reading, it seemed like there was a big focus on still using them in some of the same ways that they had been used in the past, rather than just forgetting about them. And so from what I was reading, at least, it seemed like the book was focused around preserving the idea that plants should be used in those same sorts of ways. And also one of our books on the plant uses in medicine was, some of the writing was focused around using those as alternatives to like modern day medicine as well.
All right, thank you. Rachel, from your perspective, how has the shift from collection to preservation affected current or future archaeological work within Hell's Canyon?
Yeah, I definitely think from the collection aspect of it, where really it was just taking anything out of the area and putting it in like museums. I think it's valuable sometimes to have that, but most importantly, it is about preserving it for future use. So oftentimes practices will involve not digging up everything, so that there's potential for future technology which may be better, maybe less invasive, would come in and we can learn more from it. And in addition, again, acknowledging the involvement of the indigenous groups within that space to also take charge and how much they want to break up the land, truly.
Awesome, thanks.
Could I ask a question for Caden and Abby, please? Really just first of all would just like to thank all of you guys for great presentations, and so happy that you had a chance to spend some significant time in Hell's Canyon. From the perspective of modern ecology, Abby and Caden, that there's an emphasis on the idea of ecosystems as dynamic, meaning they change over time rather than static, just a catalog of species that one can always expect to find in a particular habitat, since the plant communities themselves change, and so do the animals that plant community supports. So with that in mind, I wonder if you could speak to any of the following. What are the effects of climate change on the plants and plant communities and animals that those plant communities support in Hell's Canyon? Is there any kind of a prospectus looking into the future about how the populations of different species in Hell's Canyon might change? Second would be insect loss specifically, which is globally calculated at about 9% loss of the world's insect population per decade going into the future. And then finally would be the question of reintroduction or natural recolonization of species, both larger predator mammals, but perhaps other species as well, that for various reasons have been historically found in Hell's Canyon, but are not at present time, or that have been recently reintroduced, like the gray wolf.
To answer the first question, I'm not entirely sure about how climate change affects the animals in the canyon. I do know for a fact that most frog and toad populations are decreasing steadily, and most people think that is related to climate change. That is a tough question. That was a lot. Honestly, I don't think we have the knowledge to comment on that right now.
Yeah. So those are, just pointers, things to think about moving forward would be climate change, insect loss, and then the state of reintroduced or naturally recolonizing animals that have been either exterminated deliberately by people from this region and are coming back, or lost for other reasons. And, just on the question of the danger rating, I would suggest flipping that and talking about human beings as the danger to plant and animal species rather than how dangerous they are to us. Because as you pointed out with even the black bear, the level at which even large predator animals actually come into conflict with human beings is low and tends to be exaggerated by people who support control for various reasons, usually their own economic interests.
Well, I do know, I shouldn't have spoke so soon. I do remember actually that we had a discussion about condors in Hell's Canyon, about how the condor population has decreased steadily for a long time. They're trying to work on reintroducing condors to Hell's Canyon. There's a lot of moving parts to that one right there. And like you were saying, with humans being the danger to animals, we had talks about lead ammunition and about how that's affecting the condors.
Yep.
You like that answer? Okay. Yeah, about the lead bullets. So there's been a push. There's been a push to switch to copper bullets for hunting purposes, so that way we can actually keep these condors alive. But condors would thrive in Hell's Canyon. We learned that while we were out there.
Yep.
What was the part about insects?
Well, this is a startling statistic that I came across only fairly recently, is that it's calculated that each decade about 9% of the total global population of insects, it declines 9% per decade. So it's a huge and kind of looming catastrophe that will have effects for agriculture, certainly, but also just works its way up the trophic levels of the food chain, in the sense that everything depends on insects for food. Ultimately, we don't eat bugs too often, or at least not on purpose, but we do eat things that in turn are fed by things that are fed by things that eat bugs. So, bugs go down in terms of their total population. Fish populations likely would crash as well, for example.
Yeah, that's a big part of the problem with the frogs and toads as well. Since the insect population has been decreasing, they've had a harder time surviving, and then just incorrect temperatures, all that is just disastrous on frogs and toads. The ones around here aren't getting it so bad compared to some other ones, but most frog and toad species are probably going to be endangered within the next 50 to 100 years at the current rate.
Yep. So, you guys have come up with some, I think, very perceptive and intelligent responses that you may want to try to incorporate into the actual document, both as an introduction to sort of set the stage, and then maybe work some of those ideas and observations and contemporary issues, I guess we could call them, into the individual pages for particular species. Great work.
We were actually going to have a section about how you can help these animals. We were going to have a second section attached to everyone about the creation stories. Then we figured that wasn't going to be ideal, because they can get long and they can get a little sometimes like repetitive. So we decided to cut that out and just have it near the beginning instead. Yeah. But what we were going to do is, if we couldn't find a story about it, we were going to say like things you could do to like help the species itself.
Yeah, and some of the tribal elders that I've learned from, including Alan Pinkham, Diane Malikan, Lucy Simpson, a number of other people, have stressed the importance of traditional Nimiipuu stories, specifically in terms of trying to articulate what a proper relationship would be between human beings and other species, both plant and animal species, that it would be based on reciprocity and respect. Ideas that are also brought up by Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She's an indigenous botanist who's come to sort of public attention lately. But in addition, the idea that conflicts between human beings and other animal species, especially larger mammal species, I think, that taps into your idea of the danger rating, is often a result of human beings not respecting the idea that another species has its place in the world, we have our place in the world, and that, to understand that is to take a step toward avoiding those sorts of conflicts. which again is sort of captured, I think, at least in broader terms in your idea of the danger rating. So it might be useful to tie that to one or more traditional stories from the Nimiipuu oral tradition.
Yeah, I don't want to keep talking and cut everyone off, but that's why I had the bear lower than most people would think the bear would be, because really black bears aren't gonna do anything to you unless you're right up on them when they're protecting their cub. They're just not going to. They're not like that. But
awesome.
Right, excellent.
Thanks again. Over and out.
Questions for some other presenters?
I have one for Rachel. Rachel, I was interested that, you started off with this kind of very helpful overview of archaeology as a field, which, is so well suited to this class because it's an interdisciplinary field and we've taken an interdisciplinary approach. But then one of the areas that you really focused on was the development of policy. And so I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how thinking about Hell's Canyon through the lens of public policy might have added something new to your experience, or talk about what drew you to that angle.
Yeah, and it's honestly engaging with Dr. Kylie Brightsman's lecture about Hell's Canyon Recreation Area as a case study and looking at the policies and specifically what values are hidden within them. So the value of protecting these resources, the value of protecting the land. And so how is that wording, how is that belief tied into the practices and processes that we see today, especially with the Indigenous involvement with the American Indian Religious Freedom Act and the Indian Self-Establishment Act. So seeing that progress and that kind of culmination of that work that went into these adjustments and acts that would secure those rights or help secure those rights.
Thanks, that's great.
I have a question for Colt and Sarah. So I really liked the artistic and creative addition to your plant research. And what I mean by that is both the artwork and also the incorporation of the stories. So both aspects. So I was curious because we've had, two other projects that talk about kind of spiritual connection with the canyon. And I wondered if you kind of see your project as fitting in with this kind of multidisciplinary, spiritual and scientific kind of holistic vision of the canyon and its resources.
Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier that I really felt personally like in the canyon, I was able to connect a little bit more with nature beyond just like seeing the pictures and reading the words on the page. And so I feel like that's the biggest area where this kind of relates to that spiritual sort of view is seeing that while you're in that space and while you're present there in the moment, that all of these plants are connected and in that space with you as well. And then looking into the stories, you really get to see all of the meaning behind the plants and how they came to be and why they're there and the purpose in that space as well. So I feel like it really does kind of tie it all together in that aspect.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, could I ask a follow-up on your excellent project? You mentioned the 1990 law, the Native American Graves Protection and Restoration Act. And one of the thoughts that comes to my mind when I think about that law is that it's kind of an attempt to respond to some pushback that came up in this part of the Northwest in, I think, the 1990 or 1980s, 1990s, with so-called Kennewick Man, which was a kind of half-hearted and maybe disingenuous attempt to claim that Native Americans were not, in fact, here first, and that this is a broader attempt to, to suggest that treaty rights are not valid and that tribal sovereignty is a dubious thing as well. And I'm wondering, has archaeology been politicized in that way, specifically within Hell's Canyon? Have there been any attempts to kind of try to claim that either white settlers actually were there first or anything of that sort?
Yeah, so I definitely have read and learned about that case specifically with the Kennewick Man, and of course, it's always been a rocky relationship, and hopefully with these future policies, really ensuring that the tribes that have claimed that ancestral land are being informed and understanding and involved within that process. And specifically within Hell's Canyon area, I haven't heard any specific cases similar to that. I definitely remember reading in the newspaper one day that there has been findings of artifacts that can have dated in past 10,000 years ago. And so thinking about the population of the Americas, either through the land bridge or traveling from Asia to the area, as far as I know, there hasn't been any specific cases that have been either popped up in the news or within the journal articles.
Thank you.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes, so we probably can get in 2 more questions.
Can I ask one to Tiara? Tiara, I had the pleasure of watching you do your research for these poems in the canyon, and saw that involved in just having like tons and tons of conversations with everybody you encountered, right? And so as someone who I think, has been a creative writer since long before you came into the canyon, was this a different approach to writing poetry than you have taken in other projects?
Absolutely, yes. Totally different. I did get just a little taste of what it means to marry science and spirit last semester when I took a poetry workshop with Lauren Connolly. She was able to present and have a very late night Zoom conference with Elizabeth Bradfield, who is a Antarctic explorer and oceanographer and scientist, an amazing woman who also happens to be a poet. So she has published several books, and I was just so blown away by her vast knowledge and ability that it was something that I wanted to at least try. And this felt like a good opportunity to start. Obviously, if you look through my booklet, you're going to see that some poems are better than others. Perhaps the better ones are the ones I shared today. It was a beginning effort, but I think the most important thing to take away from it is what you learn from the exercise, and with using that lens while in the canyon, how it keeps you open-minded. So yes, new to me, but something hopefully that I'll keep in my pocket and not completely put away. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, one more. All right, well, congratulations, everyone. What a fantastic semester, fantastic presentations. It's been such a pleasure working with all of you. And I think this is just a culmination of a wonderful semester that, I'm very proud that we made it through. And we made it into the canyon and had just the best time. So For those of you who created a booklet or created, a digital collection or something like that, do please get it to us so that we can include it in our library. We would be very happy to have it. And of course, stay in touch and email us with any questions that you might have. And we will see you around, hopefully. All right. Thank you.